Welcome to a Legendarium special about the strange death of Edgar Allan Poe. In the comments section, please tell me what you think caused the death of one of the United States' first literary greats. During his short and unhappy life, Edgar Allan Poe became one of the United States' most accomplished writers. He also became one of the United States' most accomplished alcoholics. Months before his death, Poe became a vocal member of the temperance movement, opposing alcohol, which he struggled against his entire life, often unsuccessfully. After the death of his first wife a few years before, a cousin of his named Virginia Clem, whom he married when she was only 12 years old, he went looking for a new wife. For a time it appeared he found one in a wealthy woman and childhood sweetheart named Elmira Shelton, and the two made plans to marry later that year. On September 27, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe left Richmond, Virginia for Philadelphia to edit a collection of poems for a Mrs. St. Leon Loud, a minor poet at the time. He further planned to escort his aunt, then living in New York, for his impending wedding in Richmond. People noted his ashen gray and sickly appearance as he left. No one heard of or saw Edgar Allan Poe for the next 7 days. A rainy day fell on Baltimore during October 3, 1849, yet that did not stop Joseph W. Walker, a writer for the Baltimore Sun, from heading out to Gunners Hall, a public house which served as a polling place on Election Day for the 4th Ward polls. When Walker arrived, he found a delirious man dressed in soiled second-hand clothes lying in the gutter. The man could not move, but as Walker approached him, he realized this man to be Edgar Allan Poe. Worried about the health of the noted writer, Walker asked Poe if he had any acquaintances in Baltimore. Poe gave Walker the name of Joseph E. Snodgrass, a magazine editor with some medical training. Immediately, Walker penned Snodgrass a letter asking for help, which read, "Dear Sir, there is a gentleman, rather the worse for wear, at Ryan's 4th Ward polls, who goes under the cognomen of Edgar A. Poe, and who appears in great distress, and he says he is acquainted with you. He is in need of immediate assistance. Yours in haste, Joseph W. Walker." Poe went to Washington State Hospital for treatment and spent his final days in fits of delirium, gripped by vivid hallucinations and talking to phantasms he saw crawling on the walls. The night before his death, according to his physician, Dr. John Moran, Poe repeatedly called out for Reynolds, a person who to this day remains a mystery. On October 7, 1849, he briefly regained consciousness and whispered, "God help my poor soul," before he breathed his last. Dr. Moran declared the poet's cause of death to be phrentis, a swelling of the brain. However, as Poe's fame endured, people took to thinking more about his mysterious death. Given that Poe drank heavily throughout his life, most at the time blamed his death on booze. Snodgrass, who attended Poe on his deathbed, became a member of the temperance movement. During the years that followed, he gave lectures across the United States, blaming Poe's death on binge drinking to frighten people away from wine and hard liquor. However, modern science has shown this unlikely. Recent tests of Poe's hair have shown low levels of lead, often used in coloring cheap booze at the time. This makes it unlikely that he engaged in binge drinking during the days leading up to his death. Furthermore, he had publicly sworn to stop drinking, and those around him noted that he avoided drink during the months before his death. This has given rise to an alternative theory that Edgar Allan Poe in his final weeks suffered from crippling alcohol withdrawal, which, for people in frail health, Few questioned this traditional explanation until 1867, when biographer E. Oakesmith argued that Poe's dalliances with women led to his brutal beating at the hands of unnamed men. Another writer named Eugene Didier wrote in 1872 that Poe ran into some of his old friends from West Point. These so-called friends got him drunk, abandoned him, and then left him to be attacked by local criminals. In time, this suspicion that Poe fell victim to criminal violence gave rise to a belief that Poe fell victim to a practice called cooping. This method of voter fraud practiced by gangs in the 19th century involved kidnapping a man, disguising him, and then forcing the victim to vote for a particular candidate, many times under various disguises and identities. Many local power brokers in Baltimore and throughout the country employed gangs to run cooping schemes. Indeed, Gunner's Hall served as a place that coopers brought their victims. If true, this would explain why Joseph Walker found Poe on Election Day 1849. And this explanation for Poe's death remained popular through the 20th century. One of the more recent theories about Poe's death suggests that the author died of a brain tumor, which would have affected his behavior before his death. When Poe died, he was buried in an unmarked grave in a Baltimore graveyard. 26 years later, after his fame grew, a new generation of admirers built a statue in Poe's honor near the graveyard's entrance. Workmen dug up Poe's coffin and exhumed his remains to be moved to this new place of honor. Unfortunately, 2 decades of decay had not been kind to Poe's coffin or corpse. The coffin fell apart as workers tried to move Poe's remains, and little remained of his body, but one worker did remark on a strange feature of Poe's skull. He found a mass rolling around inside. Newspapers of the day declared the clump to be Poe's brain, shriveled but intact after almost 3 decades in the ground. We know today that the mass could not have been Poe's brain, one of the first body parts to rot after death. Matthew Pearl, an American author who wrote a novel about Poe's death, became intrigued by this clump. He contacted a forensic pathologist who told him that while the clump could not be a brain, it could be a brain tumor, which can calcify after death into hard masses. At the end of the day, Edgar Allan Poe's cause of death remains a mystery, and people can largely believe what they want to believe. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.